Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our second session on the ancillary property cost training. We had an original training on December 10th, but given some technology challenges, we're presenting the information again to make sure everyone has an opportunity to understand the material and ask questions. Before we get started, I just want to go over some logistical information about the presentation. The PowerPoint will be distributed on the website within the next day. Excuse me. Today's presentation is being recorded and then will also be posted on the website along with the forms and the documentation that we go over today. Except for the panelists, the phone lines are muted. However, after the presentation, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions through the chat feature in the Q&A. We'll answer as many questions as possible through the chat, but then we'll also download all the questions and provide written responses in the next couple weeks and add them to the website. For the sake of time, we're going to do some brief introductions of the capital finance team, and then we'll turn the presentation over to the team and our partners at DOH to begin. So as I said, I'm Christine Carey, Associate Commissioner in the Division of Fiscal Policy and Management. Here with us today we have Matt Richardson, the Acting Director of Capital Finance, Matt Sunyak, who oversees the Capital Finance team, and Jerry Petrie, who is our Supervisor of the Ancillary Reimbursement Unit. Also with us is David Cohen from DOH, who is going to talk to the DOH portion of the process.
Today we'll define for you which ancillary property costs are reimbursable and the process for submitting reimbursement claims to OPWDD. We'll also lay out the timeframes and deadlines for submitting claims and the role the Department of Health has in the new process. Lastly, please enter any questions in the chat window and we'll answer some of those at the end. Let's start by going over a few points from the call letter and then move on to defining ancillary property costs. The review of ancillary property costs, previously completed by DOH and now a function of the OPWDD Capital Finance team, was put on hold in 2018 pending a formal process being instituted for submission and documentation of claims. Since that time, OPWDD and DOH have worked collaboratively to establish the process that will be discussed today. On September 24th, 2024, OPWDD issued a call letter to providers explaining the new process for submitting claims for property reimbursement of ancillary costs related to properties approved through the prior property approval or PPA process. What are ancillary property costs? They are property costs that are reimbursable to the provider but are not automatically captured in the property reimbursement through a provider's rate. This includes your real estate taxes, common area maintenance charges, also known as CAM, and co-op and condo fees. Ancillary property costs do not include costs that are part of facility and/or room and board reimbursement. The following listed items are reimbursed via your CFR and as such should not be included in any charges that appear on the CTW form. Liability or property insurance, supplies and materials, housekeeping costs, repairs and maintenance, food costs, and utilities such as your electricity, heat, water, and sewage charges. So now that we've defined ancillary property costs, let's review the new process for submitting claims for reimbursement of those costs. Providers will submit requests for reimbursement of ancillary property costs for PPA-funded programs through the Charges and Taxes Worksheet, also known as the CTW form. The CTW form has been modified from its prior version and detailed instructions were developed to help ensure that your claim submissions are complete and can be processed in a timely manner. The updated CTW and instructions can be found on the OPWDD website at the link shown here on the slide. Please be sure to download the updated version of the CTW to use for submitting your claims moving forward. Providers should submit the completed CTW and supporting documentation directly to OPWDD Capital Finance's Ancillary Charges team via the email address on the slide. I want to highlight that this is new to the process. Claims were previously submitted to DOH but will now be sent to OPWDD for review and approval. Please also direct all questions about submitting claims and/or the verification process to OPWDD's Ancillary Charges team. Let's discuss a few key points on the CTW, and then we'll take a look at the form itself. One of the updates to the form is that it may be used to request reimbursement for only a single address or property. You may use a single form to request reimbursement for multiple programs, rate periods, and/or charge types, provided that all requests are associated with the same address or property. This means that each site address should have a separate CTW and separate supporting documentation. If there are multiple programs at the same property, you can use one CTW. Multiple rate periods for the same property, one CTW. Multiple charges at the same property, such as both real estate taxes and CAM, you will still use one CTW. It is when you have multiple addresses or properties that you will need to submit multiple CTWs and supporting documentation. Also, if you're requesting reimbursement for co-op or condo fees, separate residential apartments or units in the same building are considered separate properties and should be submitted on separate CTWs. Your CTWs should be submitted in Excel format with the supporting documentation attached in PDF format as a separate PDF file for each CTW form. Please also include a PDF version of the CTW form as page 1 of the PDF file. If there are 3 CTWs, there should be 3 different PDF files, one for each address. Claims must be submitted for reimbursement for the rate period in which the charges were incurred. They must be submitted annually, consistent with your CFR filing schedule, and regardless of the frequency that charges are invoiced by a landlord or taxing authority or paid by the provider. Partial year reimbursements will only be considered if the partial year coincides with the beginning or end of a lease agreement. For example, your rate period is 1/1/20 to 12/31/20, and you enter into a new lease agreement on 5/1/20. You could then submit for a partial year reimbursement for 5/1/20 to 12/31/20. If you do submit a request for any partial year claims, please include a detailed explanation. If your landlord bills you semi-annually, please hold off on submitting your reimbursement claim until you have been charged and paid for the entire 12-month rate period. There are also some landlords who will bill based on estimated charges and then provide a year-end statement reconciling the actual charges. If this applies to you, please ensure that your claims are submitted based on the final actual charges and not the estimates. Here we're looking at the top half of the CTW, the provider information section. I won't go over each field because some are self-explanatory, but I want to point out a few important items. Beginning with contact information, please provide the name, title, phone number, and email address for a primary and an alternative point of contact we can reach out to if there are questions about your claim or if we need to request additional information. Next is site address and region or DDRO. These fields are asking for information of the program for which you are seeking reimbursement and not the provider agency's business address. Please provide the full property address, including the street name and number, city, zip code, and the apartment or condo number if applicable. Lastly is the reimbursement basis. Select whether your charges are reported and reimbursed on a fiscal year or calendar year basis. As a reminder, upstate and Long Island-based providers must report all taxes and other charges on a calendar year basis, and New York City-based providers must report all taxes and other charges on a fiscal year basis. Here is the bottom half of the CTW. This is the property charge detail, which is asking for specific information about the reimbursement you are requesting. For each property charge, you must include the operating certificate number, program type, rate period, charge type, and the reimbursement amount being requested. If you are seeking reimbursement for more than one charge type for a program, please use a separate line for each charge. For example, one line for real estate taxes and one for CAM charges, so long as they are for the same property. Your rate period is determined by your reimbursement basis, whether you're a fiscal year or a calendar year filer. The dates here should correspond with the reimbursement basis you selected in the top half of this form. If you marked calendar year basis, then your rate period here should be January 1st to December 31st. And if you marked fiscal year, your rate period should be July 1st to June 30th. Reimbursement requested. Enter the amount of reimbursement you are seeking for each charge type. If there are multiple charge types, the reimbursement requested for each one should be separate and not totaled together. Important to mention here is when you are requesting the difference between a prior reimbursement and the actual charges, please provide the total amount you are reimbursable for. For example, if you have received recurring condo fee reimbursement in the amount of $20,000 and the actual condo fees were $25,000, the reimbursement requested would be $25,000. You could use the notes field here to explain that you were previously reimbursed $20,000 and the actual fees were $25,000. Notes can also be used to explain any partial reimbursement requests or any additional information that may be helpful in reviewing your claim. And one last reminder that only one address or property may be submitted per CTW form. Shown here is an example of a completed CTW form. ABC Corp. has a property located at 500 Balltown Road. During the period of 1/1/16 to 12/31/16, their day hab program incurred real estate tax and CAM charges. ABC Corp. used a separate line to request reimbursement for each charge type and its respective reimbursement amount. Now, if they had two day habs at 500 Balltown Road with two different operating certificates, ABC Corp. can still use this one CTW for both operating certificate numbers, but use a separate line for each program. As long as it's the same site address, one CTW can be used. If you need assistance or have questions while filling out the form, please feel free to reach out to us. All claims submitted for reimbursement must be accompanied by supporting documentation. There are three components of documentation needed for each charge type: verification of charges, verification of payment, and verification that the charges are reimbursable. All of your supporting documentation should be in PDF format with a separate PDF file for each claim you're submitting. Let's go over the specific documentation required for each charge type. Beginning with real estate taxes. How do we verify the charges? Taxes can be verified with a copy of the final or actual tax statements or bill issued by the taxing authority showing the property address, tax amounts, and time periods. Please note that estimated tax bills are subject to change and therefore are not sufficient documents for verification of real estate tax charges. It is important to point out that if you are a calendar year filer, which applies to all programs outside of New York City, You will need to submit 2 years of school tax statements for each rate period because school taxes are billed based on the school year, which does not align with your CFR filing schedule. For example, if you are requesting reimbursement for school taxes incurred during rate period 1/1/20 to 12/31/20, you will need to submit the school tax statements for the 2019-2020 school year and the 2020-2021 school year. Your school taxes for the calendar year are calculated by adding together the second half taxes from one school year and the first half taxes from the following school year. Including the actual school tax statements from both years ensures you are accurately reporting the costs incurred during the calendar year for which you are requesting reimbursement. If the property owner or landlord issues a bill or invoice, this should also be included in the supporting document file along with the tax statement. If you are only responsible for tax escalations, then a copy of the base year tax statement should be included for verification of base year tax amounts. The base year tax statement may be submitted one time with your initial reimbursement request for the property, and we will keep it on file for future requests. The next component of documentation is verification of payment. Payments can be verified with a copy of a canceled check or EFT statement. An invoice from the landlord marked paid or with a paid stamp is not sufficient verification of payments. Along with verification that the provider has paid the real estate tax charges, also required is verification that the tax has been paid by the landlord to the taxing authority. This can typically be found in the billing or payment history on the taxing authority's website or a subsequent tax statement showing a $0 balance carryover from the previous billing cycle. We can also accept a copy of the landlord's check paid to the tax authority if they'll provide one to you. And the last component of documentation for real estate taxes is verification the charges are reimbursable. This is verified with the approved PPA and lease agreement. Reimbursable ancillary property costs are defined in the PPA. Please provide a copy of the PPA and fully executed lease agreement, including any amendments or extensions that was in effect when the charges were incurred. This should be submitted with your initial claim for each property, and we will keep it on file for future requests. And this applies to each set of charges, whether it be real estate taxes, CAM, or co-op and condo fees. Once you submit the PPA, we'll keep it on file for future requests. When your PPA renews or is amended, please also send us those documents. It is important to note that approval of ancillary charge reimbursement for leased properties will be limited to the term of the PPA-approved lease agreement. If a program continues to operate following the expiration of the PPA-approved lease term, rent reimbursement will continue in the amount of the last PPA-approved annual rent. However, requests for reimbursement of ancillary charges for rate periods after lease expiration will be placed on hold until such time as a new PPA is approved. Ancillary charge reimbursement for any month-to-month tenancy will require landlord-tenant attestation of the rent holdover status and will be adjusted retroactively upon approval of the new PPA. The next set of charges is CAM. How do we verify your CAM charges? You'll need to submit the invoices or statement of charges from the property owner or landlord, along with the itemized vendor invoices and/or receipts for all charges. Claims for rate periods ending on or before 12/31/23 may be approved without the itemized details of charges if your lease does not require the landlord to provide such detailed documentation. However, claims for rate periods ending on or after 1/1/24 must include the itemized details and invoices or receipts for all charges for approval of reimbursement. The next two components of documentation for CAM charges are the same as for real estate taxes. Acceptable verification of payment is copies of canceled checks or EFT statements showing the provider's payment to the landlord. And to verify the CAM charges are reimbursable, please provide a copy of the approved PPA and fully executed lease agreement, including any amendments or extensions that was in effect when the CAM charge was incurred. The remaining set of reimbursable charges are condo and co-op fees. To verify your condo and co-op fee charges, please submit the invoice or statement of charges from the condo or co-op association. This includes any correspondence regarding periodic increases in charges. If you don't receive monthly statements, you can include copies of the payment coupons. As with real estate taxes and CAM charges, acceptable verification of payment of condo and co-op fees is a copy of canceled checks or EFT statements. However, if the monthly invoice or statement from the co-op association includes a record of your payments, then additional proof of payment is not necessary. Lastly, to verify the condo and co-op fees are reimbursable, please submit the approved PPA and documentation of property acquisition. As with the other charges, this may be submitted one time with your initial reimbursement request for the property, and we will keep it on file for future requests. There are currently two categories of claims: retroactive claims and prospective claims. Each has different deadlines and timeframes determined by your CFR filing schedule. Beginning with retroactive claims, OPWDD will accept claims for retroactive reimbursement of ancillary property charges in accordance with the following timelines. If you're a calendar year CFR filer, claims can be submitted for costs incurred from 1/1/16 through 12/31/23. If you're a fiscal year filer, claims can be submitted for costs incurred from 7/1/15 through 6/30/23. Regardless of your CFR filing schedule, all claim forms and supporting documentation for retroactive claims are due no later than 8/30/2025. This includes any additional documents requested from the ancillary charges team. Any claims submitted for costs incurred prior to your retroactive claim period, which is 1/1/16 for calendar year filers and 7/1/15 for fiscal year filers, will not be accepted or reimbursed, nor will late submissions received after the 8/30/25 due date. Let's go over the process of submitting retroactive claims to DOH. A very similar process to this will apply to your prospective claims as well, which we'll discuss next. But here we'll focus on the retro claims since they're the first group for which you will be expecting reimbursement. OPWDD will not submit a package to DOH for a provider until costs for all sites for the entire retroactive period have been submitted and reviewed. Providers will be required to submit an attestation upon review of the OPWDD summary of approved costs indicating they agree. OPWDD and DOH will not accept additional documentation or submissions for a provider after the attestation is signed and the package has been submitted to DOH. Each review is provider-specific and is not contingent on the submission of other providers. What does this mean? It means ABC Corp., for example, submits their costs for all sites for rate periods 1/1/16 to 12/31/23. OPWDD verifies the charges and sends ABC Corp. A summary of the approved costs. ABC Corp. Reviews the summary and submits an attestation to OPWDD indicating they agree. OPWDD then submits the package to DOH. It is important that the provider let us know once costs for all sites for a rate period or set of retro rate periods have been submitted. A brief note added to the email of your final claim submission will suffice, just something to let us know that no further claims will be submitted and we can begin preparing the summary once the claims have been verified. Outstanding claims previously submitted to DOH are in the process of being reviewed by OPWDD, and additional supporting documentation is being requested from providers if needed to verify the charges and payments. If you've received an email from us and haven't yet responded, be sure to do so to avoid further delays in your reimbursement. And lastly, we want to bring to your attention that all automatic recurring reimbursement of unverified ancillary charges, including CAM, real estate taxes, and co-op or condo fees, will cease in an upcoming rate update. Consequentially, all ancillary charges, including those that may have previously been reimbursed automatically, will be subject to verification by Capital Finance via this new process. Prospective claims. Prospectively, claims for all providers for periods ending after 12/31/23 must be submitted to OPWDD within 2 years of the last day of the rate period as follows. If you're a calendar year CF filer, your prospective claim period begins on 1/1/24. So if you submit a claim for rate period 1/1/24 through 12/31/24, all claim forms and documentation are due no later than 12/31/2026. If you're a fiscal year CFR filer, your prospective claim period begins on 7/1/23. If you submit a claim for rate period 7/1/23 through 6/30/24, all claim forms and documentation are due no later than 6/30/2026. As with retroactive claims, late submissions received by OPWDD after the deadline will not be accepted or reimbursed. Now we'll turn this over to the Department of Health to discuss their role in this new process.
Hi, everyone. My name is David Cohen. I'm the Assistant Director of the Bureau of Mental Hygiene Services rate setting here at DOH. So once we receive the package from OPWDD, we're going to go in and review against what's currently being reimbursed to make sure that we haven't already or aren't currently reimbursing some or all of these costs. We don't really expect to find many cases of previously reimbursed costs as just a necessary step in the review. And then once this review is complete, we'll incorporate reimbursement into the new property rate for the next property update. And as you know, reimbursement rates for property are updated twice a year on 1/1 or 7/1. So once we're done reviewing and everything's good to go, we'll put it into the update, the upcoming update, whether it's 1/1 or 7/1.
Now we'll take a brief pause to review any questions in the chat window and be back with you momentarily.
All right, so we got a question, is the process only for day have programs or does it apply to IRAs too? For the most part, it's day have programs. The only time it would apply to an IRA would be if it's a condo or co-op that has condo or co-op fees that are reimbursable. But for the majority of these charges, which are real estate taxes or CAM charges, those would only apply to lease day have. So we got another question. If the charges are billed based on the lease agreement, do we need to get a copy of the payment of the taxes from the landlord? The answer is yes, because the only charges here that can be reimbursed are charges that we can verify based on actual charges and actual payments. So regardless of what the lease agreement says, the reimbursement will only be based on actual charges and payments. So we will need those statements.
Okay, we're not seeing any more questions in the chat. If you do have any questions after the presentation, please send us an email. And thank you for joining us.